stacks. It's crazy. Huh. That's really bad. Yo guys, what is up? Max in our Borderlands 4 video, and today we are getting around to updating our Gambit cache guide. This is a build that exclusively focuses on Cash's Sleight of Hand action skill. We're going to have crazy uptime on our cards. They're going to hit for 30 million plus damage. And my original guide that I put out was more of a leveling guide. I hadn't made it to UVH6 yet. I hadn't like min-maxed or anything like that. It was just a very comfortable setup for leveling. Now we're like getting into like min-maxing, optimizing, and pushing this build to its limits. It's really, really powerful, and I want to share everything that you guys need to know. Hope you enjoy the breakdown. Let's do this. So what is changing with the build? A few things, actually, and the majority of these changes are coming to increase our damage against bosses. This build was really strong against mobbing. However, even on the lower UVH tiers, the cracks were starting to show on bossing, so we knew we needed to change some things. And the number one change to the build is adding in the card to our deck, the Cooler. This reads that we double all our windfall bonuses, which is strong. However, the real kicker with this card is that it does melee damage. That in itself isn't all that special. What's special about the Cooler card is this melee damage is allowed to proc Groundbreaker. Now, Groundbreaker is a specialization that reads our gun, action skill, and ordnance damage is stored. Melee attacks and slams deal bonus kinetic melee damage based on stored damage and consume it. Now you might start to see where this is kind of getting crazy, is we've got an action skill that can build and detonate its own damage. And that's where things start to get crazy with our sources of bonus elements, with our huge percentage increases to our damage. We can get Groundbreaker to basically double dip and do tons of damage. And we're basically throwing the Cowboy card, which already did a ton of damage, and then detonating the Cowboy card with the Cooler card to do, millions and millions of damage with our cards. Now, I do want to thank Ritor, who told me about this interaction. I tweeted out about the cards, and he mentioned that Cooler can proc Groundbreaker, so I had to mess around with it myself, and sure enough, this card is absolutely crazy when paired with that specialization. Now, the issue with our current setup, or the big problem to solve, is if you go the Cooler, one, you have to spend a bunch of points here, which limits our points in the other trees, and two, if we don't get enough points into another tree, we can't get Furious Fingers. Furious Fingers is what we were using on the old build. To whenever we proc Windfall, we would gain Sleight of Hand charges equal to the number of fortune stacks we had. This would allow us to have infinite card regen, and we could have 25 cards to throw at a time, and that was really, really nice. However, with this current setup, we can't use Furious Fingers, but we still have crazy action skill uptime, and so how are we achieving that? So to give a little example of what this looks like, there's our action skill. We can throw some cards, up a bunch of damage, and then our action skill is over. We shoot, we reload, get our action skill back, throw a bunch of cards, and once that is over, now we can shoot, reload, back into our cards. So our action skill uptime is still really good. You're still just kind of spamming cards on this build. So a few things that we're doing with this. The first is we are going 3 points into Dealer's Bluff. Whenever Cash gains a stack of fortune, we restore our action skill cooldown. Now, we have a bunch of ways to gain stacks of fortune on this build. One, proccing elemental effects, which is super easy with our cards. Two, whenever we reload, we have a chance to activate Windfall. Whenever we try to attempt windfall, we gain a stack of fortune. And also, if we're wearing an amp shield, whenever we shoot the hot slugger to reload, it will drain part of our shield, and then when that refills, we will gain another stack of fortune. And anytime we're gaining all these stacks of fortune from all these different things, we're going to be restoring a huge chunk of our action skill. Dealer's Bluff works the same way as now with caffeine. So for example, if we are proccing our fortune stacks, and this procs multiple times, we gain multiple fortune stacks, especially with Go for Broke. If we proc this, we're just getting right back into our action skill. So action skill uptime, still really, really good. As long as we're gaining fortune stacks, we're going to get our cooldown back basically instantly, which helps us keep us in our action skill. And if we enter windfall, we just get our action skill back for free. The other big change with this build has to do with our class mod. We used to be using the Whale class mod, which would convert cooldown into damage, and with the Thunder the Table card, we could get a ton of cooldown or a ton of damage. Now, we really need all of the points into all of these branches on this blue tree for this build to work super well, which eliminates, once again, the choice of a third augment, which actually works out well in this build. The two highest damage cards in our deck are the Cooler and the Cowboy, and so any other additional cards is basically just a DPS loss, and so Whale's ruled out for a few reasons, but the class mod that we are currently using gives us 10 out of 5 into Ante Up. Now, Ante Up is way better than it seems. This reads that we gain increased gun and skill damage the more full our gun mag is, and the more fortune stacks he has, the greater the bonus. Now, this actually scales with the size of your mag. So if your mag is like full and you have a very small mag, you actually get way more of a benefit from this than if your gun is full and you have a very large mag. In fact, it's more than double like damage if you're using a like 1 out of 1 weapon versus like a 32 mag weapon. And this gives us gun and skill damage, and it stacks with fortune stacks. So if we look at my like player sheet right now, if we go to our specializations, I am currently getting 1,291 skill damage, 743 gun damage, and 479 melee damage. And a big part of that is coming from I Am a Gun, which this gives us skill damage, gives us a ton of gun damage from Ante Up, but that gun damage is converted into skill damage, and that skill damage works for our cards. And so if we, for example, take off, let's just swap from the Hot Slugger to a Cyclone. Cyclone's got a big mag. We'll shoot and reload it. Let's check our specialization points. Now you can see that my skill damage, which was just over like 1,000% skill damage, is now 118. And all I did was swap guns. And so we are going to be holding the Hot Slugger for this build, as it gives us a ton of additive soup, or like kind of just generic damage for this build, which allows us to do tons of damage with our cards, but even more damage with Groundbreaker. So that covers the big changes to the build. Basically, we are adding in the Cooler to proc Groundbreaker procs, and we are going to be doing a lot more damage with 10 out of 5 into Ante Up for a whole lot of generic skill damage. For the rest of the skill points, Fast Hands is awesome. It gives us reload speed, but it mainly gives us extra windfall chance. We really want to be activating windfall prior to entering our Sleight of Hand, because we're going to be using Card Sharp. Sleight of Hand does not charges for a few seconds after activating it if windfall is active. This means we want to proc windfall before we start throwing our cards, so we get 5 seconds of free card throws, and Fast Hands will give us more uptime on that. We're putting 1 point into Insurance so that whenever our shield fully recharges, we gain a stack of fortune. 1 point into Alchemy. Whenever we apply an elemental effect, we get a stack of fortune. 3 points Go for Broke for the chance for additional fortune stacks for faster stacking. Trick Taker just for a little bit of extra additive elemental damage. We do not need any points into Sounds of Rain because of Hot Streak. Hot Streak gives us a ton of just guaranteed crit, because we're always going to be gaining fortune stacks. And then we go Late Scratch. Whenever we attempt to enter Windfall, we gain a stack of fortune. This is super important. It's what's going to allow us to get back our action skill almost immediately. And then Devil's Tine for the +1 to augment slots. Then on the right side, we're going payout. This gives us 1.4x on our fortune skills, which is huge because we have tons of fortune skills. Card sharp gives us the ability to spam a bunch of cards. And then hot streak, this is basically guaranteed crit for this entire build. It works way better than it says. As long as we're spec'd into this, we basically have infinite crit chance, which is crazy. And we're also going to get a little bit additional crit damage. That is why we're not putting any points into Tender Hearts. Then we're going 5 points Ace in the Hole for a little bit more gun damage, around the corner for a little bit more cooldown, but we're really just speccing these to get down to House Edge. Whenever we enter Windfall, we only consume half of our fortune stacks. This will allow us to get back up to high fortune stacks faster, which will allow us to enter Windfall more easily. And then no limit for more fortune stacks and ante up for the crazy gun and skill damage. Lastly, we're going over here to high roller. This is going to give us even more gun damage, which translates to skill damage. You could put points into stack the deck. This reads that whenever we ready our action skill, we gain increased skill damage, fire rate, and reload speed. The more fortune stacks Cash has, the greater the bonus. This is kind of unfortunately a little bit of a drop in the bucket in terms of our bonus skill damage because we already have so much. I personally spec Vigorish. Whenever we deal damage with an action skill, our guns deal bonus elemental damage of that type. The more fortune stacks Cash has, the greater the bonus. This is going to allow us whenever once again, we have a crazy amount of gun damage on this build. If we shoot our gun, we're going to proc bonus damage on top of that gunshot. And we're going to be shooting our guns in between all of our cards. And that bonus damage can get carried over into Groundbreaker. So either 5 points into Vigorish or 5 points in the stack. Stack the deck. Both are great. Vigorish is a little bit better for like basically pre-stacking Groundbreaker procs because you're going to be shooting your gun leading into it, and then Dealer's Bluff for a little bit more action skill cooldown restore. For the guns on this build, the only one you need is the Hot Slugger. Just because it's one in the mag. Technically, you could use like a purple Jacobs, but you just really want one in the mag. That is the real kicker. That's what's giving so much damage to ante up. Even a 2 in the mag, you'll lose a significant portion of your damage. For the rep kit, we're using a Kill Spring. You could use like a elemental damage in Rage rep kit for bossing if you wanted. I found that we had just like enough damage even on true mode. I was just rocking a Kill Spring for a little bit of extra survivability. Whenever we kill, we get some health back. For the grenade, we are using a waterfall. A viewer named ADI was mentioning this to me. Waterfall is great because the status effect chance can roll crazy if you can get an alchemic augment plus grenade status effect. The only thing we really care about here is the amount of fortune stacks that this can build up. There, I've lost some fortune stacks. You can see I throw the grenade, and it basically instantly gave us up to our full amount of fortune stacks, which is really nice. If you don't have one of these, you should be fine because the build just has so much fortune stack generation, but these are definitely the fastest way to get to full fortune stacks very, very quickly. For our class mod, we are using the Ludopath. This reads that whenever we roll our bone dice, we gain Ludopath, which gives us fire rate and movement speed. This is not something we're taking advantage of. We're really just here for the 5 into ante up. For our class mod, we are rocking a Wants for Dinner. I am normally rocking, it kind of depends. I do have a double siphon Wants for Dinner, which I like a lot. However, if you put on a amp Watts for Dinner, this one doesn't have amp siphon, but if you do put on an amp Watts, whenever you shoot, you will automatically drain your shield, and then that little bit of shield recharging will actually guarantee proc you a fortune stack because of our 1 point into insurance, which is super, super nice. I can't proc a fortune stack there because we're already full, but whenever you are using an amp shield, if you shoot in between your action skill and it drains the shield a little bit, the second you get your shield back, you gain another fortune stack. So really, really nice quality of life there. And then for your enhancement, it doesn't really matter. We're not really benefiting from any things here. The main kicker here is you just want gun damage is the really only thing you care about on your enhancement. For our firmware, we're rocking Skillcraft for the skill damage, skill crit chance, and stacking skill damage. And then I opted to go for 2 Rubber Band Man. You could go 2 Action Fist here, which gives you the increased action skill damage and melee damage. However, that is only a 2% increase in your damage, and you can't do damage while you're in fight for your life on this build because you can't pull out cards. So I found the lifesteal and damage reduction to be super valuable on Rubber Band Man, especially when you're like solo against cards, bosses like Bloom Reaper. I was getting much more consistent kills with the lifesteal and the ability to stay alive than I was getting 2% increased damage. So for me, I went quality of life. You could go for a little bit more damage here with 2 Action Fist. Definitely a solid option. But I'm opting on this build for a little bit more quality of life. For me, it makes a bigger difference. And once again, you can do a whole lot more damage while you're alive. I feel like I talk about it a lot, but I haven't like fully explained it. And it's pretty important to understand for this build, and that is the Borderlands 4 damage formula and what the term soup refers to. So in a lot of modern ARPGs and looter shooters, you will have a damage formula that consists of different buckets. Now, a bucket is just a category of a type of damage that is multiplicative with other types of damage. So maybe you might have crit damage in one bucket, gun damage in another bucket, LE damage in another, and then you might have like a conditional damage. Like, is that enemy, you do more damage to badasses, or you might deal more damage to frozen enemies. And this could be like your damage formula. That means that for a strong build, if you are missing one of your buckets, you just don't have a full multiplier for your build. So you want to spread out your damage formula and get everything in all of the buckets to equal the most amount of damage. However, Borderlands 4 works very differently in that when we reference soup and stuff like that, that is because Borderlands 4 consists of one big massive bucket, and your skill damage goes in here, your LE damage goes in here, your crit damage goes in here, your gun damage goes in here, your splash damage goes in here. Basically, besides some niche examples, everything is just additive with each other. So, for example, on this build, we have a 1,200% increase to our damage, and then we pick up an additional 30%, right? That goes to 1230 divided by 1200 equals 0.025, or about a 2% increase in damage. And so while 30% damage sounds great on paper, it's not actually really doing anything for the build because it's just more additive soup. It is just a little drop in the bucket, and our bucket is already pretty full. Certain builds don't have a lot of soup, and then getting a 30% increase can actually be really, really nice because you don't have many increases. But on a build that we have a ridiculous amount of increases, it's not doing a ton for us. And so that is kind of what I wanted to mention with the whole like Borderlands formula, what soup means and why, you know, picking up 30% increased or 30% skill damage in the skill tree doesn't really do that much for this particular build because we already have so much. Our bucket is at the brim, and so things that can be outside of this bucket for utility or bonus elements or a groundbreaker shenanigans is going to do a whole lot more than anything that is going into this bucket. For the specializations, we're rocking I Am a Gun, which gives us the big action skill damage. For our specializations, I Am a Gun's super important here. This is the I Am a Gun and Groundbreaker are the two most important things to grab here. I Am a Gun converting that massive amount of gun damage from ante up into skill damage. Honed Mind gives us even more damage on our cards. Bare Arms gives us more melee damage for our cooler card. And then Groundbreaker is the juice that ties it all together, giving us those big damage explosions. Guys, that's going to do it for the build. I hope you enjoyed. I will catch you on the next one. Take care. Peace.